with that, I would pass the presentation to Darshita, and I wish everyone a very fruitful session. And please keep your questions coming. She might not answer it on the spot, but we definitely try to address as many as possible at the end. So Darshita, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Edison. Hi, everyone. I think I might probably...
Darshita, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Hey, I'm not muted though. Can you hear me?
It's fine now, Darshita, sorry.
Okay. So hi, everyone. So some of you may know me already from the last session. I'm very excited to be a part of this webinar series in collaboration with SheTrades. And as you know, last week I spoke on the topic of terms of use. And today we'll be covering terms and conditions and privacy policies, which are equally important legal documentation for your business if you have a website or an app. All right, so today I'll be covering these two segments. And before I start, I'd just like to set out some basic rules for this, house rules for this webinar. This webinar is being recorded at this point in time, and this slides will be shared with you sometime after today. Also, the content on these slides, especially in relation to the privacy policy, might be a little difficult for some of you. So if you have any questions at any point in time on the content, feel free, as Edison has mentioned, to post your questions in the chat box. And at the end of this presentation, we will go through them. All right. So what exactly are terms and conditions and privacy policies? Let me give you some examples. For example, if you're on Amazon's website, when you register for an account, or if you visit their site to buy a product, you will usually see some wording at the bottom of the website page. For example, here, there's a reference to a privacy notice and conditions of use. These are similar to your privacy policy or terms and conditions that you'll see on Amazon. And if you're creating a website, similar to if you're creating an account on Uber, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you will also see that they have a privacy link here, hyperlink here, as well as the terms. So these are also, when you're creating an account, you're agreeing to Uber's terms and conditions and privacy policy. And I think I brought up this image the last session as well. So if you look at the bottom here again, for this e-commerce website, they also have in place their own privacy policy and the fashion shop's terms as well. Okay, so let's take first a look at what are terms and conditions. So 2 weeks ago, when we went through the terms of use, some of you were wondering, what is the difference between terms and conditions and terms of use? So I'd like to just take this moment to explain that terms of use focuses on usability or accessibility of your website or app. Terms of use is a bit more about how can I, as a user, use your website or app? How is your company going to restrict me from using your website or app? And for example, how will I not be allowed to use your website or app? Maybe I will not be able to use it for unacceptable users, in some undesirable ways, or any kind of illegal ways. So this contrast to terms and conditions are more about rules that affect how you sell your product online or how you can sell your services online. It's also about how customers, for example, can buy products from you online on your app or website. It's about how customers can pay for products, how the customers can ask for refunds for your products. The rules on delivery, when you will deliver, how you will deliver your products, the right for a return or a refund on a bad quality product or service. So what you'll see is that terms and conditions are more industry specific, and it has in place terms or clauses that comply with certain laws, and particularly they tend to be around consumer protection laws. All right, so to summarize, T's and C's are not always necessary. but they're very important if you're running an online business that sells goods or services to customers. And a lot of the time, if you look online for samples of T's and C's, it's quite tough to find them because companies tend to draft like this huge one long legal documentation that covers both terms and conditions and terms of use. So it really depends on your business. You may wish to draft terms and conditions separately if you feel there are a lot of rules that you like to establish about how establish with your customer or user when they visit your website or app, especially in relation to goods or services that you're selling online. Okay, so for the next few slides, when I'm going to be elaborating on some of these important considerations that you need to have when you draft your terms and conditions, I'm going to focus on the sale and or supply of goods. So, you have services or goods. And if you look at the picture on the right here, you will see that this particular website is selling groceries, and I will use this as an example throughout to elaborate more on what are the considerations that would apply to websites and apps. So these considerations, you have to take note that they would actually apply equally if you're selling items, for example, say textiles, electronic goods, or services such as massaging services, or if you provide tour arrangement services where your customers can purchase a tour package online. All right, so first off, in your T's and C's, you would like to set out some technical steps of how you can place an order online and provide grounds for when you or your company can accept or reject an order. So generally, if you're going to accept an order, that's very easy, right? Because you can just state in your terms and conditions that a customer will receive an email confirmation, which will be regarded as an acceptance of an order. But how about rejecting an order? When would you do that? So for example, in your T's and C's, you might want to state some grounds for when you can reject orders. Maybe you want to specify that if your goods are out of stock, then you will reject orders. Or if there's a mistake in the price of your goods, maybe you listed your goods as costing $5 when it actually costs $20. Then that's probably another ground for when you could reject an order. Or if maybe the order is from a country that you don't actually deliver or supply to. So that's when you want to make sure that you have in place some grounds for when you would reject an order. And generally, if you're unable to accept an order, then your terms and conditions will set out how the order can be rejected and how the customer can get a refund of any money that they've paid. So why is this very important in your terms and conditions? It's pretty much like any agreement, right? So you want to make sure that your customers are aware of when you may reject an order, and so that they will not go ahead and complain or take action against you for not fulfilling an order that they have made on your website. Okay, another important consideration to have in your terms and conditions, they relate to disclaimers on the differences in how a product could look on your website or app and how they really look in real life. So maybe let me try to explain this a bit more in detail. So sometimes you may have an image of a product on your website, which is probably, with a lot more, much brighter mode, with a lot of editing on it. And essentially that means the product that you're selling on your website may not be of the same color, size, or measurement as shown as on the website or app. So having some sort of language like this here on your, like some sort of disclaimer terms to state that your products might actually be a little bit different from what's being sold will help to inform customers and also prevent a potential lawsuit against your company for misrepresentation of the product that you're selling. So if you look here at this particular clause here, it says here, the image of your goods on our site are for illustrative purposes only. The color of your goods may vary slightly from those images. And then you want to have, something that states like, we have made every effort possible to be accurate. All sizes, weights, capacities, dimensions, and measurements indicated on our website have maybe an X percentage tolerance for discrepancies. So here, if you think it's going to be like 10%, then you just indicate, and it's very clear to your users and your customers that these are the differences in your products. All right. Another important consideration you want to think about having in your T's and C's relate to refunds and returning of products. So, for example, will your customer have the right to refund or the right to return a product that they've purchased? And if no, then this is something you want to make very, very clear in your T's and C's, so that it's very clear that when a customer purchases an item, they do it knowing that there is no right for refund or returning the item. You can even set some rules, for example, for when you would allow for returning of an item or a refund. And these are some examples here. Maybe where your product is defective, or if it doesn't match the order, or if the items are unsealed or unopened, then that's when you can get them to return it. Or if the items are non-perishable items. So obviously food items, these are some things you probably don't want your customer to return to you because it may expire or it may get damaged in the process and it's not something you can resell again. Also, you want to think about how long will a refund take for processing, and that's something you want to also specify in your terms and conditions to make it very transparent to the customer. So maybe, is it a 14-day refund period? Also, what can a customer do if they don't get the refund in 14 days? Can they contact you for a follow-up? So these are just some of the pointers I would like to elaborate on, things that you want to clarify in your T's and C's to make your company as transparent as possible on how they deal with any issues that arise from the lack of bad quality products or stuff that you're selling online. Okay, another area or another important consideration to maybe iron out or set rules in your T's and C's is how will your goods be delivered, right? So here, for example, there are different ways in which your products can be delivered. Will your company be providing a third-party courier service, or is it by post, or is it on a click and collect basis? So click and collect basis essentially means you click and buy a product and it gets delivered to a particular 7-Eleven store or a particular warehouse, and as a customer you can go down and collect it. So these are things you want to set out in your terms and conditions so that customers understand that these are the only ways that you'll be delivering your product, and it won't deviate from this. Also, you might want to think about stating maybe a general delivery time for goods and services. So, what is exactly a reasonable delivery time? Do you want to have an agreement with your customers to deliver the product within 14 days? Or do you want to draft something in your T's and C's that provides a bit more flexibility to your company in meeting delivery times? Another thing you want to consider is, when is delivery considered complete? So those who are probably in the distribution industry, distributing textile, distributing products, you want to take note here that, for example, is it when the goods are delivered at the customer's doorstep or at their premises, or is it when the goods are delivered at a warehouse or a store on a click and collect basis? Or, I think some of you may also come across the international commercial terms, Incoterms for short. These are things you want to be able to set out in your terms and conditions, so it's very clear under what circumstances delivery is considered complete, so that in any event, the customer can't complain or try to ask for their money back if you have actually completed delivery according to your terms and conditions. Another thing to think about is, what about liability for late or no delivery. So generally, you want to limit your liability in the event your company fails to deliver the goods or is late to deliver the goods. And sometimes you can state in your terms and conditions something like, we will only be liable for costs up to involved by the customer in obtaining a substitute or a replacement item, but that the company will not be liable for any failure to deliver as a result of any events out of your control. So, for example, currently with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Maybe delivery times are a lot slower, and a lot of times they're delayed. So by having these terms and conditions, then it's very clear that there in certain situations like this where it's out of your control, supply chains are affected, or logistics chains are affected, you will not be liable for late delivery or no delivery, and it's something that customers will need to understand and not take you to court for that also. Okay. Another consideration you want to think about also is, when does ownership of the product pass on to the customer? So is it upon paying for the goods? Most T's and C's will have in place something called retention of title clause. Retention of title clause means that your company will still own the product up until, even after it's been delivered, but up until the customer pays for the product. So only upon paying for the product, then title or ownership passes over to the customer. So having these kind of clauses helps you to make sure that you have ownership of the product, and you can recall it at any point in time if maybe the customer doesn't pay in the end or stuff like that. And lastly, you kind of want to think a bit more about who will pay for import taxes or goods and services taxes for goods that are delivered to other countries. Will taxes be borne by your company? Will they be borne by a third party? And here it's probably good to speak to your lawyers in your countries itself for taxation advice, because on who should bear these costs, and have that stated out in your terms and conditions itself. Okay, before I wrap up just this section itself on T's and C's, I'd like to just highlight one important point about pricing. I think in the previous slides, I mentioned something about mistakes or errors in pricing. So, for example, if you list the product as $5, but it's actually cost $20, and what can happen? So it may seem like just a minor problem, right? I'll just change it on my website, no problem here. But actually in Singapore, there was this particular quite interesting case where one lucky customer came across the website where an IT company was mistakenly advertising on its website that it was selling HP printers at a price of $66 when it costs over $4,000 for one printer. And this was not noticed by the IT company until over 4,000 orders of the printer were made. And when the IT company realized this, they were obviously crazy shocked that this happened. But obviously they are not going to fulfill these orders because they would lose a lot of money. So they wrote an email to all the customers saying, okay, hey guys, we're not going to be fulfilling these orders because there was a mistake or an error in the pricing. So you think that customers would be nice about it, but rather they actually brought the company to court. And what happened after that was the court actually thankfully ruled in favor of the IT company. And so the IT company didn't have to fulfill those orders at $66 a printer. But tying this back to our terms and conditions, right? How can we make sure that these errors are not, or mistakes that you make on your website are not binding on your company, right? So having a clause that says something like this, that it's possible that some of our goods on our website may be priced incorrectly, and if you discover an error in pricing, we will contact you to inform you of this error. It will give you the option of continuing to purchase the goods at the correct price or canceling your order. Then, if you put something like this very clearly, then it's one way to make sure that these kind of issues of mistaken pricing does not arise. So yeah, with that, it's quite a short bit on terms and conditions. Um, and before I move on to privacy policy, I do hope now that you see the difference between the content involved and the drafting involved for a terms of and condition, where as a legal document, it's quite different from a terms of use, as we had probably discussed 2 weeks ago. Terms and conditions are more industry specific. So it's all about having to examine your business and really see if it's something you need to have. Not every business needs to have this. And of course, the focus is really on whether your website or app is being used to offer or sell products or services. So that's the main difference here in terms and conditions and terms of use. So I'm sorry for those who had to wait 2 weeks to understand the difference, but I hope you now get that. All right. At this point, I'm going to move on to the privacy policy. Some of you may have probably come across this and probably want to know how is this useful, why do we need it? And these are some of the questions I'm going to try to answer today. Okay, so privacy policy. So privacy policies have become very important in the last decade or so. And that's because a lot of things are being conducted online. We surf the internet, we watch videos on YouTube, we use mobile apps like WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. And every time we use a lot of these apps or we use the internet, we are giving away a lot of our personal information. And there's nothing wrong with giving away all this personal information. But as a user of all these websites and apps, is the personal information that we're giving, is it being kept safe and securely? How is a company such as Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram really taking care of our personal data, and how are they using it, right? So let's look at the left here. There's this short article that I put here. We generally use Facebook to view people's Facebook profiles and chat with friends, right? All quite normal and stuff. But do we really know as users how our personal information is being used by Facebook? Are they monetizing or commercializing the information that we share on Facebook? And do we actually want to allow them to give away our personal data? So if you look at the article on the left, you will see that Facebook was actually sharing its users' personal data to Cambridge Analytica, which was actually conducting data analytics for election campaigns. And what this means is that your political inclinations, your likes and dislikes, for example, were being shared with a company called Cambridge Analytica that was working with political candidates to help them better understand you and how you will vote in the elections. So this is a bit scary, right? I mean, as users, we didn't know that our personal information was being shared in this way to other companies. And then if you look at the example on the right, eBay, imagine a situation where you give eBay your personal information like your names, address, password, credit card details, no big deal. When you wanted to buy a product online and someone managed to hack into your company's data, into eBay's database and get access to yours and 1 million other users' financial information. That's quite compromising because then you probably have to change credit cards. You never know whether there may be fraudulent purchases made on your credit card and stuff like that. So for these reasons itself, you can see from this diagram here, there are a lot of countries that have introduced their own data protection and privacy laws. And these data protection and privacy laws actually set out obligations on businesses as to how they will need to protect a user's personal information and how they're going to use and share information with others. And if businesses actually fail to comply with these data protection laws, these laws have very strict penalties, and data protection government agencies can impose, or courts can impose, large fines on your business. So if you remember the example earlier, under the Australian data protection law, Facebook was fined over $1 billion for not complying with data protection laws. Okay, so how does this apply to your business, right? I mean, you're not a Facebook, you're not a YouTube, but how does it still apply to you guys? So it's important for you to make sure that your company complies with data protection laws in your country, and to also have in place a privacy policy for your website or app. A privacy policy is important because it gives users transparency about how your company is collecting a user's personal data, how your business is going to store this personal data, how it is using or sharing this personal data that it's collected, and how it's going to protect this information. So privacy policies are especially important if your business collects a lot of user data. And this is almost inevitable as long as you have your business online. Usually an online business collecting personal data of their user, for example, their IP address, their web login data, cookies, third-party cookies, and so on and so forth. So it's quite rare that you will not be you would not need a privacy policy. Most times you will need to have this in place as long as you have an app or a website. Okay, it's also important to make sure that your privacy policy is customized based on your company's data protection and management practices. So if you already, this is a bit high level, but if you already have certain processes or procedures to how you would use your users' data, or how you would protect it, you want to make sure that your privacy policy shows this, or like tries to explain or show this in the policy itself. Okay, so the first consideration that you need to think about when you're trying to come up with your privacy policy is whether should it be one that complies with local privacy laws, or should it be one that complies with global privacy laws? And if you remember the chart earlier here, you can see that there are actually many countries that have their own data protection and privacy laws. You have CCPA, which is the California Consumer Protection Act, the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Act, which governs most of Europe, and a lot of other countries have their own privacy laws, sorry. So from my brief research online, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I understand that Ghana and Nigeria has its own data protection laws, but I think Bangladesh does not have its own. So for example, if you have your business that is in Ghana or Nigeria, then you will need to comply with your local data protection laws there. And your privacy policy can be created based on the local data protection laws. However, if most of your IT businesses are already reaching out to customers overseas, or if you're already collecting data from users all over the world, then you might want to consider a global privacy policy instead. So a global privacy policy is one that would usually cover data protection issues on a global basis. So this one is the General Data Protection Regulation, which is short for GDPR, is an example of one law that applies to the whole of the European Union. And this came into force in 25th of May, I think, 2018, so about 2 years now. And it covers the whole of Europe. So you may be thinking, hey, I'm, okay, this particular law just covers the EU, right? And it doesn't affect me. I'm in Bangladesh or Kenya, right? So I can just comply with local laws. But the problem is here, the GDPR and the way it's drafted applies to businesses that may be offering goods or services to people in the EU. So, and it also applies to businesses that are monitoring the behavior of people in the EU. So what does this mean, right? It means that the GDPR is wide enough to apply to your business in Bangladesh, Kenya, for example. And if your website or app reaches or targets people in the EU, or if people from the EU visit your website or use your app, then you need to make sure that your business complies with the GDPR. So it's as easy as that. As long as anyone from the European Union visits your website, that could be seen as enough for you to be in compliance with the GDPR. So that's why you may want to look at having a privacy policy that doesn't just cater to your local laws, like Kenya or Bangladesh data protection laws, but you may want to look at something that also covers the laws of other countries. And the one that you always have to think about is the GDPR, because it's the highest and most strictest standard of data protection all over the world. Okay, so in privacy policies, you're basically trying to provide a roadmap to users as to how you're going to deal with their personal information. But I've talked about personal data for so many times. So what does it actually mean, right? So if you see this little diagram here, it simply thinks about your date of birth, your address, your fingerprint, your weight or login IP address, your religion, email, name, identification number, genetic data, biometric data, personal health data. These are all examples of personal data. As long as the data can uniquely identify a person, then it's regarded as personal data. But if, for example, the data is anonymized, it's just some information, just some weight, but I don't know that it belongs to me, then that's not personal data. Sorry. Okay, so I hope you now understand why we need to have a privacy policy and what it's all about. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the content of your privacy policy and what it should cover. This is going to be quite brief, and I'm going to discuss some of the important considerations. And then we will then look at a case study of Viber's privacy policy. I hope some of you know what Viber is. It's kind of like a WhatsApp, and then we'll discuss that. Okay, so in a privacy policy, you first want to define the type of personal data that you will be collecting. Is it financial information? Is it contact information? Is it login information? And then next, you want to explain in your privacy policy what is the purpose or the basis for collecting that personal data. So, for example, are you collecting the personal data to directly or indirectly identify a customer? Are you collecting the personal data to market content to a customer? Are you collecting the data to deal with customer complaints or to make better products or services? So these are some examples where you want to specify in your privacy policy, okay, I'm collecting your voice calls to be able to provide you with better customer service next time. So that's an example of explaining what or the purpose you're collecting the data for. Another example could be, for example, in Facebook's privacy policy, they will probably want to specify that we are collecting your personal information or the pictures that you share or the information about your likes and dislikes so that we can commercialize it for advertising, to provide you with advertising content that is very focused on your likes and dislikes. So these are things you want to state in your privacy policy. Okay, and next, you also want to think about how your privacy policy should disclose what you do with your personal data. So usually your privacy policy will need to explain what it intends to collect and and how it's going to use it. So for example, if you're collecting the personal data to be used for order fulfillment, maybe to be able to sell a product or send a product over, for billing or delivery, or communications marketing, or R&D, research and development. These are things you want to be able to share in sharing your privacy policy, to explain how exactly you're going to um, use the personal data that you collect. Okay, generally a privacy policy also needs to explain how and to whom personal data is being shared to. So for example, if you're sharing for example, if your business is sharing your customers or users' data to a third party, such as advertising companies, your business partners, or any other company, for example, your privacy policy will need to mention to whom and how the data is being shared. So here, for example, if Facebook is sharing your information with a third party, then it needs to specify that, okay, we are sharing your personal information with Cambridge Analytica, or whoever else. So you need to specify who it's sharing it to. And next, you also, if your business is looking, or your company is transferring or sharing personal data to third parties that are located overseas, this is known as an international transfer of personal data. So under some data protection laws, it will be necessary to make sure that that the third party, which is located overseas, is legally bound to comply with your country's data protection laws. So let me try to give you an example. For example, if you do business in Singapore, it has rather strong data protection and privacy laws. And if you're transferring data, personal data from Singapore, where you're collecting it, and you're going to transfer it to a company in Bangladesh, for example, where maybe there are no data protection laws or weaker data protection laws, then under Singapore's data protection regulations, there is an obligation that, or requirement, that your company must make sure that when you send this data over to the company in Bangladesh, that company in Bangladesh is also able to comply with Singapore's data protection laws. And it must at least offer the same level of protection as it would be given under Singapore data protection laws. So I hope that's not too confusing, because essentially you want to make sure that not just Singapore that has a good data protection, but also the third party country that you're going to, that the data is going to. Okay. Also, in your privacy policy, you may want to set out some terms about how your company is intending to secure personal data. So here, it's important for your business to implement technical or organizational measures to help to make sure that your personal data is kept secure. So some examples could be encryption of the personal data, anonymization, where you don't link the data to the person, so it's no longer personal in that sense. You can do penetration testing of your security measures to make sure that it's not easy for hacking or attacking your services. So these are ways you can try to strengthen your security over your data, and that's what you want to set up in your privacy policy. So if I read your privacy policy, it's very clear to me that, okay, you are trying to do your best to secure your personal data, and this is what you've done. So privacy policy is a lot about transparency for users. And so also, if a user feels that you're not securing or not keeping the data securely, then maybe they may wish to not use your business, because it's clear that you're not protecting their data. So these are things you want to have in your privacy policy. Also, you want to have some language in your privacy policy to explain to users, for example, how long your company will store their personal data. Would this be 3 years, 6 months? Generally, data protection laws have some requirements on organizations that they should not retain the personal data longer than necessary. So what this means is that the personal data must be destroyed or returned after it's no longer in use. So these are things you want to have in your privacy policy and comply with them. Okay, just to keep you all informed, these are some of the general requirements or rights that are given to users under data protection laws. And this is also why you want to make sure that your privacy policy accounts for these things and make sure that your privacy policy has these requirements or obligations so that you comply with these data protection laws. So let me try to go through them one by one. Right to request access for a copy of information that a company holds about you. So this generally means that a user has the right to request that the personal data that you have, that you're holding about them, and make sure and check and see that that everything is it's being lawfully used. It's all being securely held and stuff like that. So they're able to request that access to a copy of the information that you have about them. Secondly, there's a right to request a correction of information that a company holds about you. So this basically just allows user to be able to make sure that a company is able to correct any data that is incomplete or inaccurate. And that allows you to have, like for example, in my name or so, if it's spelled wrongly, you can request a correction of the information. And that can be also something as large as your financial information to any articles about you, stuff like that. So the third one is the right to request erasure of your information. So here, a user can ask a company to delete or remove information where there is no good reason for the company to continue to have it. So for example, you've heard of the term internet is forever, right? So thankfully especially with the GDPR, people in the European Union are able to request that the information about them online is deleted. Maybe it's something that's very embarrassing about your past, or something that is not very good, then you want to be able to delete it and have it off the internet. So that is what data protection laws are about. They give you this right, and your privacy policy must have some sort of a way for your users to be able to request for this erasure or correction or access. Okay. Then there is also a right to object to processing a user's information. So here, if a user feels that, okay, this information that you're taking about, that you're collecting about me, it's something that impacts my rights or freedoms. Maybe, for example, it could be some marketing company that is collecting data about you, data of your data, and making calls to you when you don't want this. This is something that you can object to under a privacy policy. So you want to make sure that your privacy policy also covers this. Lastly, there is a right to request the transfer of a user's information or to a third party. So here, this is generally called a data portability obligation, where a company will be required to provide a user with the information that they've asked for, or to provide it to a third party. So if I can explain this a little bit better, for example, if you have your financial information with bank A and you want it to be transferred to bank B, you can request here for a transfer of your personal information or your financial data to be ported over to bank B. So I think a lot of the time, it ends up being a very tedious process where if you want to sign up for an account in bank A, we have to fill out all the information about how much money we have. Sorry, not so much about how much money we have, but all our personal data, right? What's our job, how much we earn, this and that, our name and details. So by allowing this, giving this right to transfer information, maybe you want to close down your bank account with Bank A, then all the data can be very easily be transferred over to Bank B, and that saves you a bundle of time and a lot of energy. So here, I think what your privacy policy needs to have sometimes, depending on obviously on the data protection laws in your countries, would be something where there is a data portability obligation, allowing you to transfer data from one person to another. So okay, so I think for some of you, this is probably quite technical, very dry. It's about privacy policies, and it may be a bit confusing as to how this really works, right? So let's try to use Viber as an example here to explain this better. I'm not sure how many of you know what Viber is. It's essentially just a chat messaging app for you to make phone calls or message your friends. So let me try to, yeah, give me a second. Okay, so if you look here, you can see that for Viber's privacy policy, they have a basic content page here, a content portion here where they set out things like information we collect. So this is what I talked about. Your privacy policy needs to explain the information that the type of personal data that you're collecting from the users. There's things like users and retention, which covers how your personal data will be used by Viber, how long will they hold the personal data, disclosure here, so who will they share this your personal data with? Is it third parties? Who would they share with? There's things about cookies and tracking technologies. This is a bit more complicated, but it's about how cookies are being collected, which essentially amounts to personal data about you being collected. Security, which is how Viber is protecting and securing your personal data. Access and reviewing changes to your personal information. So this is also quite useful. What we talked about in the last slide earlier about how users can access and review their personal data and how they can request for corrections. You can also see here they talk about international transfers and stuff like that. So let's go through some of these in detail. Okay, so if we look here, information we collect. So you will see here that for this part, Viber's elaborating on the types of information that it collects from its users, such as registration and account information, personal information about their name, email, date of birth, phone number, stuff like that. Social media information, the type, for example, if you visit third-party social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, through your Viber account, you'll be providing your personal information, such as your public profile, friends list, and so on and so forth, with Viber. So this is quite scary. Sometimes we don't even know what we're agreeing to when we use an app. Activity information. So for example, when you're using Viber services, information about your connection status, whether you've received or seen messages that are sent to you, who has called, the length of the call, what time did they call, who messaged who. These are things that will be shared or will be collected by Viber. And this is the type of activity information that they collect. So it's very clear, you can see here, that they have given a lot of detail into the types of personal information that they collect and how they're collecting it too. Information from other sources. So for example, This is publicly available information that they may collect from about you. And device and location information. So for example, how are they collecting your, for example, they're collecting your geolocation status, like where you're at, information about your mobile carrier, your IP address, your operating system, your browser system language. So all these things, they're collecting all this information about you to create a profile about you. Okay, so this is the first part, explaining how information should be collected. They need to explain how information is being collected and what types of information is being collected. Then if you look here, we move on to users and retention. So here, it's going to explain a bit more about how Bible will retain a user's personal data. So, sorry, no, this is first on purposes, right? So here, this portion is explaining the purposes for why Bible collects your data. So for example, they collect your personal data because they need to make their services available to you. So if you see here, it says here, we use your registration and account information to register you for your app, provide you customer service, respond to your requests, personalize your experience. So this is why one reason that Viber is given, or a purpose that Viber is given, as to why they collect this information about you. And then they also provide a little bit more other explanations as to why they collect your personal data to improve their services, to provide interesting offers to you. Here, for example, marketing information, stuff like that, to help process your payments. So they collect information about your name, phone number to process your payments, to prevent fraud or spam, and for enforcement of the law. So for example, the information that they collect about you, and if they feel that you are doing some sort of terrorist activities, or so on and so forth, or any illegal or prohibited activities, then they may collect that to be able to understand you better and report you to the authorities where necessary. Communicate with you. So as part of so in the case of for Viber, here it's about being able to, Viber will probably send you a lot of messages to communicate that they have updates or any new software changes. So this is another reason why they would collect information about you. So as you can see here, they've given a lot of detail about why they collect the data. So first, we talked about what data is being collected and how they're collecting it. Then secondly, we're talking about why they collect it. Okay, then if you look beyond here, data retention, you can see here that Viber is explaining that it will retain a user's personal data for as long as is necessary and relevant. And this is quite fine because here, generally a lot of data protection laws, especially the GDPR, state that it's okay to retain information, but you need to keep it on an anonymized basis when it's not needed. So if you see here, it says, we will retain information as long as it's necessary, and we will keep activity data on a non-identifiable basis to improve our services. So non-identifiable basis here refers to anonymous basis. Okay, and then next you can see that Viber here talks about disclosure, how they are going to use your personal data to share it with others or to whom it will be shared. So as you can see here, there's a lot of focus on sharing your personal data with the Viber corporate family, which means all the other entities that are in Viber, maybe to other third parties that may be providing you with services, such as payment processing services, site analytics, operations, stuff like that. They may also share your personal data to advertising partners to allow them to provide you with certain advertising material. They may share your data to law enforcement. So this is where I mentioned earlier, we may disclose your information to law enforcement or government agencies in response to a verified request relating to terror acts, criminal investigations, and so on. So here you can see that these are examples of how personal data of a user will be shared. So just to recap again, this privacy policy discusses how personal data, what personal data has been collected, how it's being collected, why is it being collected, and to whom it's going to be shared or disclosed to so far. And then I think we talked earlier about this in one of the slides, being able to access, review, or change your personal information. So if you see in this particular clause, it says here that as a member, you can review and change your personal information anytime by accessing your account on the app or by contacting our support. So this is basically giving users the right to access, review, or change personal information. So this is how you can draft your clauses as well. This, if you see specific location practices, they make a reference to California privacy rights under the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act. And then they also make reference to the EEA privacy rights, which is the European Economic Union, where this relates to the GDPR, which we talked about earlier. So you would see that a privacy policy generally always covers the GDPR and the CCPA separately as well. And this makes it a global privacy policy. Why? Because these two, GDPR and CCPA, are very widely drafted that it covers not just people of their country, but it, as I mentioned earlier, as long as an EU person visits your website, then the GDPR would apply to you. So it's very wide, and that's why you want to have some clauses that deals with the GDPR and CCPA. And then you can see here that they have a clause about security, like how is Viber securing your personal data. So you can see here that they maintain technical, physical, and administrative security measures to protect the security of your personal information against loss, misuse, unauthorized access, disclosure, alteration. And you can also see here that they included a couple of examples of how they provide security. So they have firewalls, data encryption, physical access controls, and access authorization controls. So these are some examples that you usually want to list in your privacy policy of how you're keeping personal data secure. And then if you look here, there is another clause on international transfers. So here, this provision here is essentially dealing with how international transfers of data will be carried out. If you can see, Viber lists a couple of countries where they process and store personal data, like US, Europe, Australia, Brazil, so on and so forth. And they also set out that your personal information may be processed in countries where data protection and privacy regulations may not offer the same level of protection as your home country. So home country here, meaning if you have a country that, if, for example, if I'm in Singapore and all my company is in Singapore, then my privacy laws would be much more stronger or more strengthened as compared to in a country that has weaker privacy laws. So here you're setting out very clearly that when we transfer our data to another country, it may be in countries that don't have very strong data protection laws. But then if you see here what Viber has said, we have put in place appropriate safeguards such as contractual commitments in accordance with the legal requirements to ensure that your data is adequately protected. So by mentioning these safeguards, Viber is trying to show that don't worry, your data is adequately protected. So this is how you want to draft your international transfer clause. But the thing you want to take note of is you can't just have a clause in there that states that you're in compliance with the laws if you don't actually have these processes. So you want to make sure that you have these safeguards, and if you don't have these safeguards, then you don't want to mention this in such a way, because then you're basically giving wrong information. Okay, so and then you can see here, last but not least, there are these two portions here, updates to this policy. So, this policy can evolve or change from time to time. And this is essentially an amendment provision. And we talked about this last week, where if there are changes to the policy, this will be a clause that helps to let users know that the policy can be changed from time to time. This is actually a very important clause, the contact us clause, right? And you need to have this very importantly in your privacy policy, because it basically gives the user details about your data protection officer, so that they can contact your company essentially to ask about your data policies, or to even request for a specific right. Remember earlier that there's a right for erasure, there's a right to access a copy of your data, there's a right to change the information or correct the information. So all these things you want to have, you want to give the user the ability to contact you to get that done. So this is also quite important. Okay, so I've been talking for the last hour, I guess, but yeah, so I hope you've now probably understand or have learned some of the basics of a privacy policy. Viber's privacy policy is quite good, but it could have done more to share with users, for example, how it deals with data breaches, whether it's going to notify users that, hey, we have a data breach and this is the information that has been lost. And more information could have been shared about which third parties that Viber works with. So, I mean, they mentioned that they work with some advertising partners, but maybe if they had provided more information on the specific third parties, you as a user may be more convinced to use the app, because you know who exactly it's going for. Is it going to go to Cambridge Analytica, or is it going to go to real or good marketing companies, stuff like that. But all in all, it's a really good place to start for a privacy policy. Okay, so I've pretty much come to the end of this webinar. I'd like to just focus or emphasize 3 points here. So the first point is your terms and conditions. Preparing this is not very easy a task, because it's a contract that needs to be customized based on your company's business model. So it depends on the types of products you're selling or offering, or the types of services that you're offering on your app or a website, the rules you want to create for your product or service, from refund to delivery rules, all these things you want to set it out. So here it's probably important to reach out to your legal advisors if you want to draft this properly and well. Unless, of course, you have a business that follows a specific model and you can follow their privacy policy, then you can do that. But all in all, it's probably best to reach out to your legal advisors. For the privacy policy, and then secondly, for the privacy policy, you want to think about whether you want a local privacy policy or a global one that covers other countries. So if you're based in Kenya, it's not just Kenya data protection laws, but also the GDPR, the CCPA, stuff like that. So as you've probably seen, a privacy policy can get very, very technical. And this is something that's not very easy to do by yourself, because it's a lot about understanding how these data protection laws work and drafting something that works for your company. And not just drafting that, but also making sure that your company has all these processes in place to agree to. So for example, if you're going to say that the user has a right to correct the information, but in the backend process, if you don't have something that allows you to do this, then you're essentially not telling the truth, or you're not giving correct information in your privacy policy. So this is something I really, really advise reaching out to your legal advisors. Please do not try to do this by yourself because it's not very easy to do so. And one last point I'd like to hammer that I hope that I've hammered enough in the last webinar about how do you make your T's and C's and privacy policies legally binding on users? And remember, like this whole idea of I accept or click I accept concept. So that's the same thing that you would apply here for the terms and conditions in privacy policy. So you can get your users to agree to your T's and C's in privacy policy to create a legally binding contract. Yeah, and I think with that, I'd like to open the floor to any questions that you have.
Hi, Dashita. Thank you again for fantastic webinar. Very informative and definitely, combines well with the past webinar we had 2 weeks ago. Before we launch into the question and answer, I will be launching a poll. All of you should be familiar with it. So please, everyone, try to fill it up if you can. It should pop up on your screen right now. And let's begin with Q&A. Ashwini asked, which I believe you covered to some degree, is in scenarios of export from one country to another, which data privacy policies would be considered, exporter country or importer country?
Export from one country to another.
Yes.
So yes, so I suppose if you're producing your goods in one country and then you're exporting to another, it really depends. If you're doing it online, I suppose, then it's really where you're collecting your data from. And in the case of, it's a bit tough to answer this question, but it would be both, I would think, because if, for example, you have a e-commerce website where you're exporting goods from one country to the other, then you're gonna be dealing with consumers or customers from the importer country, as well as maybe the exporter country, who may be the sellers. So you want to probably make sure that you have a privacy policy that covers both these countries. Usually privacy policies would cover the countries that you are doing business in. So if my business is in Singapore, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and I do business there, then I want to make sure that my privacy policy covers these three countries as well.
Okay, thank you, Dashita. Hold on, let me see. All right, Ijeoma, I hope I didn't pronounce your name wrongly. How do we get to know how all these policies works in different countries? Is there like a repository where, they outlined where things overlap?
Well, there's no like, I don't think there's like a, so I think, okay, so it depends on where you're from. You first want to understand your own country's laws and whether there is a data protection law in your country. And then usually to know whether you have a data protection law in the other countries, then you usually have lawyers to help you do that. Otherwise, you can sort of just Google like what I did to see whether Bangladesh had a data protection law, because I don't know myself. And there's no real dictionary. I think Google is your best dictionary here. And yeah, I think as I mentioned, it really depends on where you're doing business. So in the countries that you're doing business, then you probably want to also research for yourself and see whether there are data protection laws. And if there are, then you probably want to comply with them. But also to take note that not every data protection law is as wide as it is in Singapore, because, it's not as wide as it is in for the GDPR, because like for example, in Singapore, our data protection law is more focused on any organization that is in Singapore or is collecting data in Singapore. So it doesn't really care that you have a user that is located from somewhere else that is accessing your website. It just cares about how you are managing your data in Singapore. And that's quite the case for a lot of the data protection laws. So it really depends where you're doing business and understanding this. So privacy policies are very important. Really reach out to your to a law firm or anyone who works in like a lawyer to understand this better from your side. Yeah.
Thank you, Dashita. I would urge, well, there are, let me calculate my math, 19 more participants who haven't responded to the poll. So
No worries.
I would appreciate if you could respond to it. We have a question from Amina. With the technicalities involved in privacy, wait, hold on. Let me rephrase it. Well, Amina, I would like you to actually pose this verbally, because your first question I do not fully understand. I will unmute you so you can ask this, if that's okay. Hold on. Let me see if it works.
Yeah, I'm on mute now. Good morning, everyone.
Hi, morning.
Yeah, so the question is, with the technicalities involved in privacy laws, I mean, having to match a very long document for my country, and then for import countries, for example, for in terms of e-commerce engagement, is there any marketplace to find legal practitioners that are skilled in e-drafting of terms of use for companies that are going digital, or likewise exporting products from, let's say, Africa to maybe Singapore or to Canada or something? Maybe if you have like a marketplace like Upwork or something where you can find specific legal practitioners that are skilled in e-drafting of those kind of laws, compliance
Where
laws.
are you from? Amina?
Nigeria.
Nigeria. Okay, so I guess for the first place you want to look for like corporate lawyers in Nigeria itself that are focused on drafting, who have more experience drafting technology related agreements, so like privacy policies, stuff like that. And if your business is, for example, working with a lot of other countries in Africa or other parts of the world, like even in Singapore, so then you can actually work with lawyers in Nigeria to, and they will be able to sort of work with other lawyers to help you draft your terms of use. But I would start from your local lawyers itself. And unless you're saying that there is no, unless you're saying that there are no lawyers that can really do this, then you can look, to another country. But the problem is, for example, if you would ask me to help you draft, I wouldn't be able to draft it because I don't know Nigerian local law, so I can't really draft your terms of use based on, or your privacy policy based on that. So I would usually go with the corporate lawyers in your country, and someone who's more focused and who's able to provide advice on technology related agreements. Does that answer your question? Maybe no.
Yeah, it does. The thing is, shouldn't your law, the data content you have on your site be based on the kind of audience you're looking to attract to your site? For example,
Yes.
if I want to attract the Canadian markets to my e-commerce platform, for example, I want to ensure that my terms of use and my data protection clauses on the I don't know on that section,
yeah,
actually covers the highest laws within those countries. Yeah,
right.
I don't know if
so
I'm
like the most like stringent or the most strictest laws, right? So
exactly.
I would always advise clients to start with the the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. That's an EU law, because once they came up with it in 2018, everywhere around the world, everyone is now changing their data protection laws to meet the standard of the GDPR. So like in Singapore, for example, now our privacy laws are being amended, and they will be changed to meet very close to the GDPR levels. So for you, if you want something that's global, as you say, because maybe you want to attract Canadian market or everything, yes, it's important to two things. One is important to obviously maybe work with a Canadian lawyer then, who can give you a privacy policy that would suit Canadian laws or Canadian data protection laws. But at the same time, there's also, you can also think about, just meeting the GDPR standard, because usually that would be the highest, so far as the highest, and it shouldn't be too far off from all the other data protection laws. But okay, so if I can rephrase my advice, obviously make sure that your privacy policy is drafted by then a Canadian lawyer. And then, for example, if you're going to open up your market to US, then you want to make sure you have a separate privacy policy for US users. And then if you want to open up your market to Thailand, then you want to have a privacy policy that caters to the Thailand market. And generally, they're all not too far off. There might be some differences. That's what you want to do first. But of course, if you want to meet the highest level, then it will be the GDPR. So if you can, have a policy that complies with that level of data protection, then you're pretty much quite secure for a lot of the other countries too. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Amina, for the question. We have another question from Esther. I believe this is very similar to the one Amina has posed. Is it wise to choose to work with a global privacy policy as opposed to a local one, since it caters to a wider area? Or would you advise to go for both local and global? You have answered this, yes, Dashita. Or if you have any,
actually, I would add on. Yeah, no worries. I add on a bit more. See, I think, Esther, you're right. You would go for both local and global. So, for example, I have a client that is looking to set up an app that will be in the whole of Southeast Asia, right? But they're going to start the business just in Singapore. And so because of that, you want to make sure that they not just only have a privacy policy that focuses on Singapore data protection laws, but that you also have a privacy policy that would cater to all the other countries in Southeast Asia or Asia. And at the same time, have one that covers GDPR as well. So it's kind of like, unless you're only doing business locally, then you just have that one country, but you would usually see like privacy policies are quite wide. So the way to do it is you draft one privacy policy and then you get it reviewed by the lawyers in the other countries so that they can review it and see where are the gaps in their law to supplement that policy. So then it becomes something that can be used in the next country as well. Does that answer your question, I hope, Esther?
Okay, we will. Yes, it does. Thank you, Dashita. So let me take a few more questions. Let me see. All right, do we have any more questions? It seems like we've addressed all of them at the moment. If anyone would like to pose a question, you could type it in the chat box or raise your hand. Yeah, you can raise. Can you raise your hand here? No. Yeah, so you could just post a question in the chat box. We will just wait. We still have 14 businesses who haven't filled the poll. I know some of you are experiencing technical issues, but the others I really appreciate if you could just click 4 buttons. Yes, the presentation document will be shared. Wait, hold on. I have to ask Dashita. Is it possible to be shared?
Yes, it can be shared.
Okay.
This one's fine. Yeah.
All right. So last 10 seconds. Any questions? All right. We do have another session on the 28th of August, and that is on protecting intellectual property. Maybe Dashita, do you want to give a small teaser or
sure.
to what it would be like?
So I think the next and the last one for this round would be on intellectual property. So here, I mean, I'll be focusing more on like global, on a more global level, how you can protect, for example, if you have a business that needs trademarks, registered designs, patents, and copyright. So I'll explain just generally how they all work, what they're about. I'll probably talk a bit more about how you can apply for some for a registration, and give a bit more detail on that. So I think it's a bit more focused for any of you guys who have IT businesses, that you know that you need to protect your software or any of your apps, or any of your marks, your logos, your copyright, your software copyright, stuff like that. So I'll go through that on a very high level basis. Hope to see you guys there.
Darshita, would this session also cover potentially businesses in the textile and apparel, where it's copying of designs, not necessarily IT services, but physical
Copying of designs that are. Oh yeah, I remember that question from last 2 weeks ago. I can try to look into that and put it. I haven't created the slide, so I'll work on it, and I can put that in for sure.
Great, yeah. So, well, again, it's very cross-cutting, the next session, and I'm pretty sure you all benefit as much as I have. I've learned a lot. Well, thank you, Darshita. I think everyone says that it's great. I agree as well. And
That's
definitely
good.
look forward to
It's
having,
very technical.
yeah, it's technical, but I think, a good webinar makes it easy to understand, and I think we all can agree on that. Well, thank you everyone for your time on Friday. And with that, I wish you a fantastic weekend. You've worked hard and now, so take a good rest.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And if you have any questions, of course, just run them by Edison.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Have a great time.
Bye.
Bye.